The drilling rig had started sinking at 11 o'clock in the morning. Not suddenly. Nothing sinks suddenly in the coastal marsh. The soft clay and peat of the North Frisian marshland yields in the way of materials that have been accepting weight for centuries without judgment. Slowly, continuously, with a consistency that is almost courteous before it becomes irreversible. The survey vehicle, a 7-ton boosting truck with a portable drilling unit mounted on its flatbed, belonging to the Hamburg Geological Survey Company, contracted to assess the ground conditions along the proposed new coastal protection dike, had come off the grass track at the Halligkug turnoff and had found over the following 40 minutes that the firm-looking surface of the lower marsh was neither firm nor, in any meaningful sense, a surface. By 11:40, the rear axle was at the level of the grass. By noon, the drilling frame was leaning at 12 degrees from vertical, and the driver had concluded that continuing to run the engine in forward gear was not contributing to the situation in any useful way. Dieter Bremer, the survey chief, had arrived from the field camp at 12:15. He was 37 years old, had been running geological survey operations in northern Germany for the Hamburg firm since 1953, and had managed 4 equipment incidents in that time with the company's own recovery procedures. He stepped out of the survey Land Rover, walked to the edge of the firm track, looked at his drilling rig sinking into the Halligkug marsh at a steadily worsening angle, and began making calls. By 3 o'clock, he had accepted that the calls were not going to produce anything useful before dark. If this is your first story on this channel, subscribe now and hit the bell. New story every single day. Let me tell you about the Halligkug marsh and about what soft coastal clay does to heavy equipment, because this specific ground is where this story was decided. The North Frisian coast of Schleswig-Holstein has been fought over between sea and human settlement for 1,000 years. The coastal marsh, the marsh, is land reclaimed from the sea, built up over centuries from the tidal deposits of silt and clay that the North Sea leaves behind when it retreats, and defended since at least the medieval period by a system of dikes and drainage works that are the cumulative investment of 40 generations of coastal farmers. The character of this land is layered. At the surface, looking across the Halligkug from the dike road, you see a flat expanse of green grass that looks like any meadow in any part of Germany. What you do not see, without the knowledge that comes from working this land across generations, is the vertical complexity beneath the surface. The survey vehicle had crossed the lower marsh on a track maintained for light farm vehicles. It had worked for the farm vehicles because those vehicles, the Lanz Bulldog, the light transport carts, the equipment of an economy that had been managing this land since before the internal combustion engine, had been designed or selected over generations for exactly the ground pressure this specific marsh would accept without yielding. The survey vehicle had not been designed for the Halligkug marsh. The old Grabenrand, the drainage berm, was the key to working the lower marsh with any confidence. The berm was the accumulated spoil from the 1847 drainage ditch installation, placed in a continuous ridge alongside the main drainage channel. Over 112 years, this ridge had settled and compacted to a density significantly greater than the surrounding marsh surface. It rose perhaps 40 centimeters above the surrounding ground and was covered by the same grass as everything else. From any distance it was invisible. In terms of bearing capacity, it was the only solid ground in the lower Halligkug other than the maintained track. Joachim Petersen had known about the Grabenrand since his father had shown it to him in 1921. Bremer's first recovery attempt had been at 1:30. He had positioned the survey Land Rover on the firm track and attached a steel cable to the drilling rig's rear tow hook. The Land Rover's rear wheels had spun on the grass at the track edge, the tires finding insufficient traction to pull 7 tons of drilling rig from soft clay. The rig had not moved. The Land Rover had come close to sliding off the track edge itself. His second attempt had involved laying timber boards on the marsh surface between the track and the rig. The boards had sunk into the marsh within 20 minutes of being placed, the soft clay accepting them with the same patient thoroughness it had accepted the drilling rig. He had called the contractor in Husum who had a tracked recovery vehicle. The contractor had said 2 days minimum. He had called the district road authority. The road authority had a large crane, but the crane needed firm ground within reach of its outriggers, and there was no firm ground within reach distance of the drilling rig. By 3 o'clock, he was standing at the marsh edge looking at the rig, which had now reached an angle of 19 degrees from vertical, and thinking about the equipment replacement cost and the project delay. Joachim Petersen came across the dike road at 3:15. He was 63 years old. He had been farming the Halligkug since 1928. His family had been in the Kug since the drainage project of 1847. His great-great-grandfather had been one of the farmers who had dug the drainage ditches that year and had settled the reclaimed land when the dike was complete. In 31 years of farming the Halligkug, Joachim had developed the working knowledge of the marsh that was the only way to work it. The practical, specific knowledge of exactly where you could put wheels and where you could not, of which months allowed which loads, of where the old drainage infrastructure made the ground reliable. He came across the dike road with the Lanz and stopped at the edge of the marsh track. He looked at the drilling rig for a long moment, then at the surrounding marsh surface, then at a specific line that ran from the marsh track edge to a point approximately 8 meters from the drilling rig's front axle. "There is an old Grabenrand from the 1847 drainage," he said. He pointed at a line running from the track edge. "The berm is 40 centimeters above the marsh surface and compacted from 100 years of drainage. The Lanz will cross it without sinking. From the berm end, the pull angle is direct to the front axle." Bremer looked at him. He looked at the marsh, which appeared entirely uniform. He could not see any difference between the line Petersen was pointing at and the rest of the marsh. "A drainage berm from 1847, he said. "That I cannot see." "You cannot see it because the grass covers it the same as the rest, but the soil underneath is different." Joachim pointed at the track. "My great-great-grandfather dug that drainage ditch. He placed the spoil beside it. In 100 years that spoil compacts. It bears the Lanz. The marsh beside it does not." One of the survey crew members looked at the Lanz and then at Bremer. The expression contained a complete assessment. Bremer looked at the drilling rig, at the 19-degree angle, at the 2 days the tracked vehicle would take, at the Hamburg morning conversation. "How long?" he said. Joachim said, "An hour if the berm holds." "All right," Bremer said. Let me tell you what Joachim Petersen understood about marsh recovery, and the old Grabenrand that Werner Bremer's geological training had not prepared him to know. The Halligkug lower marsh had a bearing capacity of approximately 0 for any vehicle over 2 tons attempting to cross it on the standard grass surface. The clay and peat below the grass root layer had never been compacted and had never been intended to carry vehicles. It was productive agricultural land for grazing, and cattle and sheep have ground pressure low enough to use it safely. A 7-ton drilling rig did not. The Grabenrand had a different constitution. When the 1847 drainage channel was cut, the excavated material had been placed in a continuous berm beside the channel. This material, over a century of settlement and compaction, had developed a bearing capacity measurably higher than the surrounding marsh, not high by road standards, but high enough. High enough for a horse-drawn cart. High enough for a Lanz Bulldog driven carefully. The Lanz contributed 2 things. First, it was light enough for the berm. At 2,200 kilograms with wide agricultural rear tires, its ground pressure was within the berm's bearing capacity, as Joachim had verified over 30 years. The drilling rig truck at 7 tons had not been close to manageable anywhere in the lower marsh. Second, the flywheel. The marsh clay around the drilling rig's front axle had, over 3 hours, created the specific suction seal that fine-grained saturated clay creates around any metal surface, strong enough to require a steady pull to break it, weak enough that a steady pull would break it. The Lanz's flywheel produced exactly this, a pull that neither surged nor jerked, that built steadily against the suction and maintained itself through the peak rather than snapping at it. The angle from the berm endpoint to the drilling rig's front axle was also correct, not straight back toward the track, but diagonally across toward the berm, which gave the pull a lateral component that helped break the clay's suction from the side as well as from the direction of travel. Joachim had pulled equipment from soft places in the Halligkug 4 times in 30 years, always with the Lanz, always from the Grabenrand, always by attaching to the front axle. It had worked 4 times. He expected it to work a 5th. Subscribe now if you have not, because what happens on the Halligkug Marsh in the next hour is the reason this Kug still talks about Joachim Petersen. He set fire to the Lanz at the Marsh track edge. The November wind off the North Sea found the Halligkug without obstruction. The marsh was flat, and the dike was the highest point for kilometers, and the wind moved across the low grass with the patient indifference of coastal weather that does not notice human concerns. The blowtorch flame bent slightly in the wind, and the cast-iron hot bulb chamber at the base of the engine absorbed the heat at its own pace against the cold of a North Sea November morning. 12 minutes, he had expected 12. The color arrived precisely on time. He set the torch aside. Starting crank, first turn, the flywheel moved. Second turn, fully committed. Third turn. The engine fired. Pum! The sound went out across the Halligkug Marsh, across the flat grass and the soft clay beneath it and the cold salt marsh air above it, and the marsh gave it back without the amplification of forests or gorges. Just the flat North Sea return, the sound arriving back slightly quieter, slightly diminished by the enormous flat space it had crossed. Pum, pum, pum. 1 beat per second across a coastal marsh in November. The exhaust pipe sent its dark smoke into the gray North Sea sky, bending in the wind. The survey crew watched. Bremer watched. Nobody said anything. Joachim climbed onto the open seat, the North Sea wind directly on his face, and drove the Lanz to the point where the Grabenrand began. He found it the way he always found it, by counting 6 paces from the concrete drainage culvert at the track edge and feeling through his boots for the slight rise of the old berm beneath the grass roots. He stepped off the Lanz and confirmed the rise with his boot heel at 3 points. The berm was there. He climbed back on. Hit subscribe and the bell. New story every single day. Stay with this. Pum pum pum. The Lanz moved onto the Grabenrand. The difference was immediate and unmistakable to anyone who had driven the Lanz in the Halligkug before. Firm ground. Not road firm, but the specific density of old compacted drainage spoil that had been settling for 112 years. The wide rear tires pressed into the grass and root layer and found, 30 centimeters down, the compacted clay of the 1847 berm. They did not sink further. The machine moved at its field pace, and the marsh on either side of the berm was soft and the berm was firm, and the Lanz did not deviate from the berm line. 12 meters. Joachim stopped, directly adjacent to the drilling rig's front axle. He climbed down. He walked carefully across the 8 meters of soft marsh between the berm and the rig, quickly, lightly, his feet not pausing long enough for the clay to engage his boots. He reached the rig. He attached the winch cable to the front axle tow hook. He walked back to the berm. He climbed on. He engaged the winch drum. Pum pum pum. The cable came taut. The flywheel turned. The North Sea wind continued across the Halligkug. The marsh held the drilling rig the way the coastal marsh holds everything it accepts, completely, without urgency. For 25 seconds the rig did not move. Then it moved. 4 centimeters, sideways and forward, toward the Grabenrand. the angle of the pull drawing the front axle across the marsh surface toward the berm rather than simply back toward the track. The clay suction seal breaking from the front axle's leading edge as the machine moved across rather than against its direction of sinking. Sideways first, then forward. 8 centimeters. 12. The front axle was moving. The Marsh, having accepted the load for 3 hours, was now yielding it back, the clay releasing its grip section by section as the pull drew the machine across rather than straight out. The rig's angle had changed from 19 degrees to 14. Bremer was watching. He was thinking about the geometry, about why this approach was working when the straight-back approach had not, and the answer was arriving with a slight discomfort. The front axle cleared the soft clay surface. Joachim held the throttle, the flywheel held the pull, the berm held everything. Pum pum pum. The drilling rig came across the lower marsh on the berm line, both machines moving together at the Lanz's field pace, to the hard track at the dike road edge. The survey vehicle was on the track at 4:20. Bremer came to him when the drilling rig had been confirmed undamaged. "Petersen," he said. Joachim was coiling the winch cable. "The Grabenrand. Your great-great-grandfather built that drainage channel." "In 1847, Joachim said. "The channel is still there. The berm beside it is still there." He set down the cable. "It compacts for 100 years. It becomes something different from the rest of the marsh." "I could not see it," Bremer said. "No, the grass covers it." "How do you know where it is?" "My father showed me. He showed me every berm in the Koog before he gave me the farm. His father showed him. It is how you work this ground. You learn what is under the grass before you put anything on the grass." He looked at the marsh. "Your survey is of the ground surface. The ground surface here tells you very little." Bremer was quiet. "We are going to be surveying the full Koog boundary," he said. 3 more weeks of vehicle work." Joachim looked at him. "Then you need to know where the Grabenränder are before you move your equipment onto the lower marsh. Come to the farm at 7 tomorrow morning. I will walk you through it." Bremer said, "Yes, then thank you." Joachim climbed onto the Lanz and drove back up the dike road to the farm. Pum pum pum. The geological survey of the Hallig-Koog boundary was completed over 3 weeks in November 1959. For the remainder of the survey, the equipment access routes had been planned in advance with Joachim Petersen, who had walked the survey crew through the full berm network of the lower marsh, and had marked the berm lines on their field maps with a pencil. No further equipment was lost to the marsh during the survey. The survey results contributed to the planning of the coastal protection dike constructed between 1962 and 1965. The dike was built. The Koog was protected. The survey that made it possible was completed without further incident because an old farmer had walked a survey crew through a drainage network that his great-great-grandfather had built. Joachim Petersen farmed the Hallig-Koog until 1974. The Lanz Bulldog stayed on the farm. His son Klaus farmed after him and kept the Lanz for the lower marsh work. There was no other machine that suited the weight requirements of the soft sections. The Grabenrand from the 1847 drainage project is still there. The North Sea wind still crosses the Hallig-Koog without obstruction. The grass still covers the berm exactly as it covers everything else. From any distance, the difference is invisible. The Lanz fired on the 3rd turn of the crank until 1981. Pum pum pum. Some knowledge belongs to a specific piece of ground, and to the families who have worked it across enough generations to understand what is under the surface rather than what is on it. The Geological Survey Company had a modern vehicle and professional training, and a brief to understand the ground along the coast. Nothing in their preparation had included the question, what does a family know about this specific marsh after 4 generations? Nothing in their preparation had included that question. It should have. Old iron crossed the old berm on the old marsh. The palm went out across the Halligkug and came back from the flat North Sea distance, quieter than it had left, faithful as old iron in the cold. Some things persist because they were built well and nobody had reason to remove them. The berm remembered. Pum pum pum.